They didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't even hesitate. Two HOA board members walked straight into my open garage like they owned it, snapping photos of a metal shelf I've had longer than I've lived in this neighborhood, talking to each other like my private property was a crime scene. They came in with clipboards, bad attitudes, and something even worse, certainty. Certainty that their position on the HOA gave them the right to enter my home, document what they wanted, and leave without consequences. Certainty that families like mine are scared of fines, legal threats, and the phrase, community compliance. Certainty that we would shrink. They saw a garage. They saw a shelf. They saw a violation waiting to be written. But they didn't see my wife coming, because 10 seconds later, she walked into that same garage, barefoot, holding a coffee mug, wearing sweatpants, and delivered the sentence that transformed two self-appointed neighborhood enforcers into two terrified sprinters. I'm a U.S. Marshal. Step away from the property. No yelling, no theatrics, no threats, just a fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who deals with real authority, not HOA fantasy power. You've never seen people run so fast in business casual shoes. They sprinted down my driveway like there was a siren behind them, phone still recording, clipboard bouncing, and dignity shattered in the wind. My kids watched from the living room window thinking it was a game. But it wasn't a game. It was a line. A bright, sharp, undeniable line, drawn in winter sunlight across the floor of my garage. The HOA can enforce rules. They cannot enter your home. And that day, they learned it the hard way. Now let me tell you everything that led to that moment. I need you to picture this moment clearly, because it's the kind of scene that sounds like a joke until you're the one living it. It was a Saturday. The garage door was open. I was on the concrete floor sorting through screws, old tools, and a pile of Christmas decorations I kept promising to organize next weekend for the past 2 years. There was nothing unusual about it. Sunlight coming in from the driveway, music playing on a Bluetooth speaker, the smell of dust and cold air, and the constant mental calculation of, do I actually need this box of tangled lights, or should I just throw it out? Normal, peaceful, predictable. Until it wasn't. I didn't hear a doorbell. I didn't hear footsteps on the driveway. I didn't even hear a hello or excuse me. No, I heard voices. Not outside. Inside. Inside my garage. 2 voices, one male, one female. Calm. Professional. Like they were doing a job. Except their job was happening 2 feet inside my house. I froze at first, confused. Then their words hit me like cold water. He hasn't filed the shelving exemption form. This violates emergency access spacing. Emergency access spacing? Shelving exemption form? What kind of parallel universe did I wake up in where a metal shelf in a private garage requires federal paperwork? My brain went into fight or flight mode, but my legs moved before the rest of me caught up. I stood. I rounded the side of my car. And there they were. 2 HOA members standing fully inside my garage, one with a clipboard, the other with a phone taking pictures of my shelf. Not the street, not the driveway, my shelf, the one holding old paint cans and Christmas leftovers. My body reacted before my mind did. What are you doing in here? I felt the sentence more than I spoke it, like my voice came out from somewhere deep, protective, angry, confused all at the same time. They both jumped, obviously realizing they'd been caught doing something insane, but the woman recovered almost immediately, the tone shifting into that robotic authority voice people use when they try to sound official. We're documenting a violation for community compliance. She said it like she was an FBI agent in a warehouse filled with counterfeit passports, not a suburban neighbor snapping photos of a $40 shelf from Home Depot. The man stepped forward, almost like he was trying to block me from the shelf. His tone was practiced, self-important. Garages must remain accessible in the event of a fire. This shelving setup is non-compliant. Non-compliant. With what? My shelf wasn't blocking any exit. There's no door behind it. It's not leaning against something dangerous. It's a shelf. In a garage. Doing shelf things. But here's the part that really matters. They didn't just take pictures. They didn't just enter the garage. They entered with confidence. The confidence of people who believe they can't be told no because they represent the association. That's the part that still hits me. They didn't have fear. They had certainty. They thought HOA rules let them enter my house. And that's when something inside me clicked. Not rage, clarity. Not everything requires yelling. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask the right question. So I asked, "Did you knock?" The woman blinks. A flicker of confusion. Then a defensive answer. "We're allowed to inspect any visible area of the property." Visible area. As in, if you can see it, you can enter it. That's not an HOA argument. That's a burglar argument. I stepped forward, not aggressively, but with enough presence that he had to take half a step back. "This is my garage. You didn't knock. You're inside my house." Their faces changed. Not guilt, not apology. Annoyance. Like I was the problem for interrupting their mission. The man lifted his clipboard like a shield. "Sir, we have authority to enforce compliance protocols." They were so drunk on their own power that they didn't realize how insane the situation looked. Two neighbors, inside someone's private garage, taking evidence photos, over a shelf, on a Saturday morning. You know what this is? It's the exact point where HOA power fantasies turn into reality clashes. But here's the twist they didn't see coming. My wife heard the voices too. She walked into the garage quietly, like she was entering a room she'd cleared 1,000 times before. No shoes, sweatpants, hair in a messy bun, coffee mug in hand. Not a soldier, not an officer, just a wife walking into her garage. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She just looked at them and asked, "Did you enter with permission?" That's the difference between people who act powerful and people who are powerful. People who act powerful make speeches. People who are powerful ask legal questions. The HOA duo hesitated, because now it wasn't a messy homeowner interrupting their moment. It was someone who sounded like they knew exactly what permission meant in a court setting. The man attempted to respond. "We're allowed to inspect visible areas." She didn't let him finish. She placed her coffee mug down on the bench like she was placing a badge on a podium and said, "Identify yourselves. Then step away from the property." Not angry, not emotional, just clear. And that's what frightened them, clarity. Because clarity makes liability real. Their entire attitude shifted. The woman lowered her phone. The man stepped back. Suddenly their confidence had a crack. But they still didn't understand the scale of their mistake. So she made it plain. "I'm a U.S. Marshal. You're trespassing. Step away from the property immediately." Boom. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just truth. I've seen a lot of reactions in my life, but I've never seen two adults go from smug to sprinting faster than that moment. They left the garage like the floor was lava. Clipboard bouncing. Phones still recording accidentally. Pens flying. The woman literally ran down the driveway like her shoes were on fire. She didn't even look back. The man tried to maintain dignity. He failed. Halfway down the driveway he abandoned that plan and just ran too. Two people who walk around calling homeowners non-compliant turned into track athletes at one sentence. That's the part that still makes me laugh when I replay it in my head. They should have known better. But that's the danger of false power. When someone wears authority like a costume, they start to think it works outside the stage. HOA boards are supposed to protect property values, not break into garages like community police. They forgot that. And my wife, with one calm sentence, reminded them of the boundary. "Your power ends at my door." I stood there watching them run, stunned, processing everything in slow motion. The shelf, the photos, the legal language, the invasion, the reveal, the sprint. And then she picked up her coffee mug and said the most wife thing ever. "Close the garage. You're attracting idiots." I laughed so hard I stopped being angry. Because here's the thing. Anger is loud. Truth is calm. They had anger masked as authority. She had truth backed by law. And truth always wins faster. We pulled the garage door down. The motor hummed. The sunlight disappeared. But something else closed that day too. The fantasy that the HOA had power inside my home. They didn't. They never did. They just pretended because nobody ever questioned it. And that's the real story here. Most HOA power only exists because homeowners don't challenge it. We assume a violation letter means we're wrong. We assume the tone is legal. We assume the board understands the rules. But usually the board has no legal training, no enforcement rights beyond civil process, and no jurisdiction over private interiors. All they have is confidence and fear collapses when someone stands up. That day wasn't about a shelf. It wasn't about a garage. It was about the line. Private property is not community space. Policy is not law. And authority printed on HOA letterhead is not real authority. Real authority doesn't need to yell. Real authority doesn't trespass. Real authority doesn't photograph your garage. It just asks questions. Did you enter with permission? Step away from the property. End of story. Except it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because 2 days later, the HOA didn't send an apology. They sent something better, a community-wide email that said, "Reminder, all inspections must be scheduled with homeowner consent." In HOA language, that might as well be, "We screwed up so badly we're trying to cover ourselves quietly." I didn't respond. I didn't brag. I didn't post screenshots. Sometimes silence is louder than victory laps. Let the whole neighborhood wonder why the sudden policy reminder came out of nowhere. But I'll tell you the truth here, because that's why you're listening. The HOA thought title equals power. They thought clipboard equals authority. They thought policy equals law. And they learned none of that survives contact with someone who actually knows the law. That was part one. The moment everything flipped. What came next was the fallout. Board panic. Legal discussions. Community whispers, emergency meetings, power struggles, retaliation attempts, neighbors picking sides, and the one lawsuit they never wanted to face. Because when you trespass into the home of a federal officer, even unintentionally, you don't walk away clean. You walk away running, and you never pretend your clipboard is a badge again. I understood immediately what the board was trying to do. They weren't trying to correct the mistake. They were trying to explain it away, like bad decisions become noble if you wrap them in the right vocabulary. Neighbors started repeating phrases that sounded too polished to be theirs. I'd hear a woman walking her dog saying, "They were just trying to ensure safety." A guy unloading groceries muttering, "They had good intentions." Someone at the mailbox saying, "It's their responsibility to enforce the guidelines." That's when you know a narrative is being fed deliberately. People who never read the rules suddenly speak like they wrote them. The strangest part was that nobody said any of this directly to me. Not a single person came up to my door and said, "Hey, what happened?" They preferred the comfort of distance, believing whatever version of the story required the least friction. I could tell what version the board was pushing, though. They weren't the ones who trespassed. They were the ones protecting the community from a dangerous shelf. Not a joke, that's actually how they saw it. In their mind, they were the heroes doing dirty work. They didn't run because they were wrong. They ran because I had supposedly escalated a harmless situation by playing a badge card. That was the narrative. The fact that the badge was real didn't fit their story. So they edited it out the same way bad storytellers edit out inconvenient facts. But there was one detail they couldn't rewrite: the retaliation. A normal HOA might apologize. A healthy one might seek mediation. Ours? They taped paperwork to my door. That wasn't protocol. That was personal. Nobody goes from trespassing to inspection request in 2 days unless they're trying to win a power struggle they already lost. It was like watching a chess player who's already checkmated, still moving pawns as if the game isn't over. My wife didn't react the way I expected. I thought she would be furious. She wasn't. She was analytical, like she was investigating a case rather than living through it. She laid the paper on the table the way someone lays evidence in an interview room. Then she walked through the logic out loud, not for herself, but for me. If they believed they did nothing wrong, they wouldn't need new paperwork. They'd rely on existing rules. She wasn't emotional. She was calculating patterns. Normal enforcement uses existing policy. Targeted enforcement creates new policy. That sentence hit me like a hammer. Not because it sounded legal, because it sounded true. Retaliation isn't loud. It's procedural. Everyone imagines retaliation as yelling at meetings or slamming doors. In reality, retaliation comes in envelopes, written in polite fonts, signed with a committee stamp. Quiet, clean, professional cruelty. I realized then how many people had probably been controlled the exact same way, through paperwork, not confrontation. The lawyer, Mark, confirmed it with a single sentence. They're not punishing the shelf. They're punishing the pushback. And suddenly the whole neighborhood's silence made sense. People weren't scared of consequences like fines. They were scared of attention. Attention from the board was the currency of fear here. The moment your name crossed their desk, life became paperwork. Endless reviews, petty complaints, micro-enforcement disguised as formal procedure. Most people don't have the time or emotional energy to fight that. They're tired. They work. They raise kids. They don't want to spend 6 months debating a mailbox color or grass height. So they comply not because they agree but because it's easier. It's easier to cut the grass twice a week. It's easier to move the trash can before sunrise. It's easier to repaint the mailbox. It's easier to obey than to confront a group who sees confrontation as validation of their purpose. I didn't want to become a symbol. I didn't wake up dreaming about fighting a board. I just wanted to keep a shelf in my own garage. But the moment they entered that garage without consent, they made me something I never planned to be, a homeowner who knows the line. Later that week, I learned something that hardened my resolve. A neighbor who rarely talks slipped a folded flyer into my mailbox. No note, no name, just a printed paragraph from the HOA handbook with a yellow highlighter mark. The text said, "Association representatives must receive explicit consent before entering any interior portion of a member's property, unless responding to an immediate safety emergency." Highlighted. They knew the rule. They just didn't care about the rule when they believed I didn't know it. That realization changed the story for me. It stopped being about a shelf and started being about something deeper and uglier. Some people follow rules until breaking them gives them more control. Once that sunk in, the path forward became simple. If they wanted to fight through procedure, then we would fight through procedure with real law on our side. It wasn't passion. It wasn't anger. It was strategy. Mark explained it in plain, steady language. Courts don't punish HOA strictness. They punish HOA favoritism, revenge tactics, and selective enforcement. Selective enforcement. Those two words were the key. If the board walked into my garage for safety, then they should be walking into every garage for safety. They weren't. Therefore, safety wasn't the reason. The reason was me. Me questioning a lawn violation months earlier. Me asking, "Can I see the policy?" Me not being intimidated by the tone of their letters. The shelf was just the excuse. The real violation in their eyes was that I didn't bow to the authority they believed they had. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office when Mark said something that genuinely surprised me. "You're not the first. They've probably done versions of this before. You're just the first who didn't fold." That sentence echoed in my head for days. The board didn't suddenly wake up one morning thinking they had police powers. Behavior like that evolves. It grows one unchallenged inch at a time. First they knock, then they peek, then they walk in halfway, then they walk in fully. Every inch they take is an inch someone failed to defend. It felt like being handed a map of every unspoken story in the neighborhood, all the little humiliations, all the moments people gave in to avoid conflict. My situation only looked extreme because it was the end of a long pattern. When we left Mark's office, he handed me a simple action list. No movie dialogue, no dramatic threats, just a paper with bullet points. Document everything. Record dates. Save notices. Do not respond emotionally. Only respond in writing. Wait for their next move. It felt anticlimactic, like being given a grocery list after a speech about war. But that's how power is fought in real life. Not through shouting. Through records. Paper trails, not arguments. On the drive home, my wife looked out the window quietly. She wasn't thinking about winning. She was thinking about deterrence. stopping them from doing this to anyone else. When we pulled into the driveway, she said something that stuck with me harder than anything Mark said. They ran because they knew they were wrong. They retaliated because they're afraid to admit it. That was the psychological truth under all of this. People who make mistakes can apologize. People who believe they are authority can't. For the board, apologizing wasn't just uncomfortable. It meant admitting their power had limits. And people who want control fear limits more than consequences. That night, I stood in the garage again, staring at the shelf. The most innocent object in my whole house, metal and wood, had become a symbol of a battle I never asked for. Then I realized something ironic and a little funny. That shelf wasn't blocking anything, but it forced them to reveal everything. Their intentions, their mindset, their fear. They came looking for a violation. They left revealing their own. After that night, the war wasn't about the shelf anymore. It was about the board trying to defend a story that couldn't survive daylight. And I had something they didn't. Clarity. They had convincing phrases. I had documented facts. They had gossip. I had a legal case forming like a storm cloud. They had a narrative. I had the truth of what happened inside that garage, spoken calmly by someone who carries authority the board can only pretend to understand. From that day forward, everything moved inevitably toward confrontation. Not the dramatic kind, the legal kind, where truth sits on paper in front of everyone and nobody can run. They ran once. They wouldn't be able to run again. The first real shift didn't come from the board. It came from somebody I didn't expect. A neighbor who had never looked me in the eyes for more than 3 seconds. I was pulling weeds by the sidewalk, a mindless kind of chore that almost felt spiritual after weeks of dealing with paperwork and whispered drama, when I heard footsteps stop behind me. Not slow footsteps, not the lazy kind. Quick, like someone walked across the street with purpose. I turned. It was a man named Alan. Retired, quiet, always wore the same faded baseball cap like it had sentimental value he never spoke about. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked one question. Is it true they went inside your garage? Not trespassed. Not entered without permission. He said went inside your garage, like he was trying to strip away the legal language and get to the naked reality of it. I don't know why, but that sentence hit different. So I said yes. Just that, yes. Straight, unembellished, unedited. He nodded once. Then he said something I didn't expect from a man who never spoke above a whisper. They tried to get into mine last year. I stared at him. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't angry. He was tired, the kind of tired that sits in someone's bones long after the fight is over. The kind you only get when you're helpless, when someone stronger than you tells you what you're allowed to do in your own home. He explained in quiet pieces what happened. He'd left his garage door cracked open. The smallest gap, barely enough to slip a hand under, while he ran inside to grab a tool. When he came back, 2 board members were holding the door up with their hands, peering into his garage like raccoons looking for shiny objects. He didn't know what to do. He shouted. They left. They told him they were checking for stored hazardous materials. That was their explanation. Hazardous materials. In a retired man's garage. Paint cans, fertilizer, gasoline for the lawnmower, things everyone keeps. He didn't make a complaint. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't document it. He let it go because he didn't want the board's attention. Fear disguised as convenience. He shook his head as he finished talking and said something so small it almost got swallowed by the wind. I'm glad someone finally said no. Not, I'm glad someone fought them. Not, I'm glad someone sued. Not, I'm glad someone stood up. He said no. Because that's the first step in every kind of change. Someone has to say no without apologizing for it. His story wasn't a rant. It wasn't emotional. It was a quiet confession. Someone handing me a secret he'd swallowed alone for a year. I realized the truth in that moment. What happened to us wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern that the board got comfortable repeating because nobody ever fought them. I wasn't fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for a neighborhood full of people who learned how to stay silent. That realization changed something inside me. Anger turned into purpose. My wife listened to the story later that night, sitting on the couch with a legal pad in her lap, her handwriting precise and clean like someone trained to document facts. Her face didn't change, but her posture did, the way she straightened her back, the way her pen slowed. She murmured, "Pattern of behavior, not emotional commentary, legal observation. Patterns matter in law more than individual mistakes. Patterns show intent. Intent shows abuse, not error." That night, while the kids slept, the house glowed softly from the warm lamp in the living room, and my wife laid everything out like pieces in a case file. The original entry, the photos taken without consent, the rushed retaliation, the secret meeting, the sudden policy reminder, the whispered narrative about safety, and now another complaint from someone else. Not dramatic, just connective tissue. Every small detail was a thread in a larger fabric, and when she stepped back, the pattern looked ugly. People using authority like it was a weapon, not a responsibility. The next morning, Mark, our lawyer, confirmed what she already saw. If this becomes a case, the pattern will matter more than the incident. I asked him what he meant by if. He said something that sounded like strategy disguised as wisdom. You'll never need the court if they understand what the court will see. In other words, nobody wants a judge to read their behavior out loud. Judges don't get swayed by the tone of emails or polished safety excuses. Judges read actions, and actions have no filter. On paper, the story looks like this. HOA entered private property, without consent, documented personal items, then retaliated, when confronted, and attempted to justify behavior afterward. That is the kind of sequence that doesn't survive sunlight. But the board wasn't thinking about sunlight. They were thinking about control. Control is addictive, especially when it's built on fear. I saw the second ripple a few days later. I was walking back from the mailbox when I saw 3 neighbors huddled at the end of a driveway. When I approached, the conversation stopped so abruptly it felt like someone hit a pause button. They didn't meet my eye. They didn't speak. They didn't move. Just silence, thick and awkward. One of them, a woman named Laura, finally broke it. "We heard you're trying to sue the HOA." Not a question. A verdict. Her tone carried judgment, not curiosity. I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said. "I'm trying to hold them accountable." She blinked like she didn't understand the difference. To her, to many people, accountability and hostility look identical, because most people don't know you can do both with calm. She crossed her arms. "They're volunteers, you know. They're doing their best." She said that as if volunteering makes someone immune to responsibility. Lots of terrible decisions in history were made by volunteers who believed their intentions were enough. I didn't argue with her, because people don't change their minds through confrontation. They change their minds when they realize their comfort is built on someone else's discomfort. Before I could reply, her husband spoke up, unusually bold for a man who usually nods through conversations. "Did they really go inside your garage?" Not protocol, not exemption forms. Inside. The real question people cared about wasn't about processes. It was about boundaries. "Yes," I said. He didn't say anything else. He just exhaled. A long, low sound that meant more than words. That was the moment I saw the neighborhood dividing into 2 groups. People who feared the board losing control, and people who feared the board gaining it. You'd think the story would calm down or slow as time passed. It didn't. It accelerated. I got 3 anonymous notes over the span of a week. Small pieces of paper with shaky handwriting. "Thank you. They did it to me too. Please don't stop." No signatures. No details. Just relief, the kind people deliver anonymously because they're scared someone will see them speaking. Fear is invisible until you start fighting the thing that creates it. Then it becomes visible everywhere, like dust in sunlight. One night, I heard yelling outside, sharp, tense voices coming from down the street. 2 men were arguing about something involving the board, and who thinks they're the sheriff around here? I didn't get the full context. I didn't need it. It was happening. My story was becoming everyone's story. Not because of the shelf. Not because of the badge reveal. but because everyone has their own version of a garage incident, no matter how small. A letter that felt accusatory, a threat that was unnecessary, an inspection that felt invasive, a warning that felt personal. Every homeowner has a moment where they realize some people use rules to feel powerful, not to protect anything. And once one person pushes back, other people see their own reflection in it. That's when the board made their third mistake. They sent a neighborhood-wide email, long, formal, dripping with defensive vocabulary, clarifying that no member of the association has ever entered a residence without appropriate authorization. Appropriate authorization. That phrase made me laugh so hard I had to sit down. Not only was it a lie, it was a lie written by someone who thought changing 2 words could erase reality. Not entered without consent. Entered without authorization. If someone doesn't know law, the difference sounds like formatting. But if someone knows law, especially someone like my wife, the difference sounds like admission. Authorization implies authority exists if applied correctly. Consent means no authority exists at all without permission. You can't claim you had authorization when the only way to get it is through the person whose house you entered. The wording showed what the board really thought. If they could find the right justification, the wrong action would become right retroactively. That email told me everything. They weren't scared of a lawsuit. They were scared of exposure. Exposure is worse than court. Court happens once. Exposure spreads. Exposure embarrasses. Exposure changes elections. HOA power isn't legal. It's social. Lose the social power and the legal power evaporates on contact. That email went to every mailbox. My wife read it twice slowly, then said, "They wrote that to convince themselves." She wasn't being clever. She was being precise. People who believe their own excuses stop being able to tell the difference between truth and narrative. 2 days later, Mark sent a registered letter to the HOA office, addressed to the president. It wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. A request for full documentation of any attempted inspections. Names of any board members present during entry. Photograph metadata timestamps. Any record of authorization mentioned in their email. Copies of camera footage if claimed. It was a polite way of saying, show the proof of your story. We have the proof of ours. That letter didn't accuse. It asked questions. Questions are sharp. Sharper than accusations. Because accusations allow people to defend themselves emotionally. Questions force people to defend themselves factually. And facts don't run. Only people do. The board received the letter on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, every member of the board was avoiding eye contact with every neighbor. Not because they were scared of the lawsuit, because they were scared of being asked. Is it true? No one wants to be the one who has to explain to another adult that they walked into someone's garage without permission over a shelf. There's no version of that story that sounds sane. After that letter, my wife looked more relaxed. Not because she wanted revenge, but because the board had finally stepped onto a path they couldn't control with narrative. There are no gossip translations in a lawyer's file. There are only facts, and facts don't care about tone. When you read a timeline next to a policy book, a lot of ugly things become obvious. Who took action, what they ignored, how they retaliated, where they lied, why they continued. The why is always pride. It's never about the shelf. It's about someone being told no for the first time in a long time, and not knowing how to emotionally survive it. A week after the letter was delivered, the HOA called for a closed board meeting to discuss community matters. Closed means the community is the topic, but not the participants. The meeting lasted 3 hours. 3 hours to explain a shelf. 3 hours to justify a mistake. 3 hours to rehearse a story. I didn't attend. I wasn't invited. But people talk. They always talk. Information leaked like water through a cracked dam. I learned almost everything through sideways conversations. Half the board wanted to apologize. Half the board wanted to fight. One person threatened to resign. Another said, "We can't back down now." Someone cried. Someone shouted. Someone said the word lawsuit too loudly. Someone said, "We should have never gone inside." Someone said, "We'll say it was misunderstood." That's how pride breaks, not cleanly, but in whispers. By the next morning, the HOA president sent out a new email. "We invite concerned members to attend a community discussion at the clubhouse this Saturday." Concerned members. Concerned. They were trying to turn a legal violation into a community opinion poll, as if trespass was a matter of debate. But I wasn't angry, because that email was a white flag disguised as an invitation. They were saying, "We need help shaping this story," and that meant they no longer believed their own version. Pride was cracking. Fear was seeping in. Not fear of me, not fear of my wife's badge. Fear of responsibility. Responsibility is the thing people with fake authority run from the fastest, faster than they ran down my driveway. The story was moving toward something inevitable. A room, a table, faces, paper trail, and no exit. The board ran once. They wouldn't be able to run again when the truth was printed on pages in front of them. That Saturday was coming, and I was ready, not to win, not to humiliate, but to finish teaching a lesson they forced me to teach. Rules exist to protect people, not to give anyone power over them. And the moment you forget that, someone eventually reminds you. Sometimes gently, sometimes with a door frame and a badge. Saturday arrived like a deadline. Not on a clock, but inside my chest. There's a kind of tension that doesn't show on your face but lives in your breathing, the way a room changes when you know something is about to shift permanently. Maybe that sounds dramatic for a neighborhood meeting, but when the thing you're fighting isn't the shelf but the behavior the shelf revealed, then you understand this isn't about metal and paint cans. It's about power and whether the people who think they hold it understand where it ends. The clubhouse parking lot was full. Not HOA newsletter full, election day full. Cars lined both sides of the street. People walking up the sidewalk in clusters, whispering, some curious, some cautious, some visibly anxious. I'd lived on this street for years, and I had never seen the community gather like this. It made me realize something important. Everyone knew this meeting wasn't about me. It was about them, about whether any of them owned their homes or just rented them psychologically from a committee. My wife walked beside me, expression unreadable. She wasn't in uniform, obviously, but there's something permanent in the way she moves. She doesn't walk into rooms. She assesses them. It's subtle. You see it in posture, in stillness, in the way her eyes take everything in with quiet efficiency. Most people don't notice it, but the people who do usually feel it in their spine. We stepped through the glass doors. The air inside the clubhouse was thick, a mixture of cheap coffee, nerves, and the heavy silence of people waiting for confrontation they're pretending isn't confrontation. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, almost all occupied. People looked up when we entered. Some looked away instantly. Some held eye contact a beat too long. The board sat at a long table at the front. 6 chairs, 6 matching water bottles, stack of papers in front of each. Karen, the HOA president, sat dead center like a judge who'd cast herself for the role. Her expression was controlled, but her hands betrayed her. Fingers tight around her pen, knuckles pale. To her right sat the 2 who had walked into my garage. They looked different today. Not physically, but spiritually. Gone was the calm certainty. Gone was the superiority. They looked like people who had been rehearsing explanations for 7 days straight. Mark, our lawyer, sat beside us. Not at the board table, not at the back, but in the front row, angled slightly sideways so he could see both the board and the crowd. People noticed him. People noticed his quiet confidence, the professional stillness in his posture. They whispered, not loudly, because whispers have a way of getting louder on their own once they start moving. The meeting began with a microphone feedback squeal, the universe's way of saying, everyone relax. Right before nobody does, Karen cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming," she began, performing calm. "We want to address some recent concerns and provide clarity." Clarity. The word was poetic considering everything they'd done had been to avoid clarity. She spoke slowly, carefully, like every sentence had been vetted by 3 different egos before landing on paper. There has been a lot of misinformation regarding association actions and safety protocols. Misinformation. The word made my wife exhale through her nose. Not a sigh, just a subtle laugh anchored in disbelief. Then came the strategy, the attempt to rewrite reality in real time. At no point did the board intentionally violate any member's rights or enter private property unlawfully. Intentionally. Another careful word. Soft, forgiving, and absolutely useless in court. Intent doesn't erase action. You don't break into someone's garage accidentally with a phone camera out taking photos. She continued, outlining how the board had acted in good faith to ensure safety, how certain actions were misinterpreted, and how tensions escalated unexpectedly. Every sentence was a masterpiece of passive language, where actions didn't have actors, and consequences just happened like rain. Not once did she say, "We walked into somebody's garage," because saying that sentence out loud would make the absurdity too naked to hide. Mark leaned toward me and whispered, very quietly, like a narrator in my ear, "They're not talking to us. They're talking to the room, trying to secure their votes before we speak." He was right. This wasn't about defending themselves legally. It was about saving face socially. Because an HOA election isn't won in courtrooms. It's won in clubhouses, by people convincing other people that power used wrong was just power used misunderstood. When Karen finished her practice speech, she did something predictable. She tried to control the narrative by controlling who speaks next. "We'll take questions," she said. "But we ask that everyone remain respectful and constructive." Respectful meaning gentle. Constructive meaning easy to answer. Hands shot up, not mine. Not yet. A woman asked whether her kid's basketball hoop was still allowed. A man asked about parking rules. Someone asked about tree trimming schedules. The board relaxed visibly. They thought the room wanted normalcy, not conflict. They thought they'd contained the story. They were wrong. About 15 minutes in, someone stood up without raising a hand. An older woman, gray hair in a braid, voice trembling with something that wasn't fear but anger disguised as calm. She didn't ask a question. She said a sentence that pierced the room. "Did you or did you not go into their garage without permission?" Silence. Not the kind that lasts a second, the kind that stretches like a rope being pulled tight. Karen opened her mouth. But the woman spoke again, louder. Yes or no. No narrative. No explanation. No safety excuse. Just truth in binary. The board looked like a deer frozen in headlights. They needed nuance, context, excuses, not yes/no. Yes or no exposes raw honesty without the padding. Nobody answered. Nobody. Not even the two who were there. The woman didn't sit down. She repeated herself. Yes or no. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Everyone also knew they didn't want to say it. Because once you say yes, everything after it is noise. Mark stood without being invited to the microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform anger. He just said, "The answer is yes." The room reacted, not with gasps, not with outrage, but with the quiet kind of shock where people realize the truth they suspected just became official. Karen tried to regain control. She leaned forward, gripping the mic too tightly. What happened was a misunderstanding. My wife stood up at the exact same moment. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just stood, like she was rising to address a courtroom. Her voice was calm, controlled, and devastatingly simple. No, it wasn't. The mic wasn't in her hand. She didn't need it. Her voice carried anyway. People turned to her instinctively. Not because she demanded attention, but because she spoke like someone who never wastes words. They walked into our garage. They took photos of our personal property. They did this without consent. When confronted, they tried to justify it. Then they retaliated through new procedures. No emotion, no flourish, just facts in order, each one a nail in the narrative they'd spent a week building. She wasn't loud, but the truth was. Karen opened her mouth again, probably to deliver the script she rehearsed. My wife was already one step ahead. And for the record, she added, I only identified myself after they attempted to assert authority they don't legally have. Silence again, but a different kind now. Not anticipation, reality sinking in. Most people in that room didn't know my wife was a Marshal. Some of them probably thought it was neighborhood gossip invented for drama. Now they knew. From her, not me. The two board members who entered our garage looked like they might evaporate. Not because of the badge, but because the actual truth had entered the room, and once truth enters, stories collapse. Karen tried one last time to regain framing. Our intention was never to. Mark interrupted, not rudely, but like someone correcting a detail in a deposition. Intent doesn't change trespass. That sentence hit the room like a verdict. Everyone understands trespass. You don't need a law degree. You don't need to like anyone involved. You don't need details. Someone entered someone else's home without permission. That's the whole case. You could feel the board shrinking behind the table, stuck between their pride and the realization that their version of events was no longer defensible in front of an audience they needed to respect them. A man in the back raised his hand. He didn't wait to be called on. I got a violation for having a ladder visible in my garage from the street. If they had the right to look inside theirs, then they can look inside mine too. That's when the dam broke. Voices rose. Stories spilled. Not screaming. Stories. The kind people had swallowed and chewed on their whole lives, now coming up like a flood. I was written up for leaving my garage open while mowing the lawn. They told me my recycling bin was visible from across the street. They measured my hedge with a tape measure. They tried to enter my backyard to take pictures. They said my curtains weren't an approved shade. Not complaints, confessions. I realized the board didn't just abuse power once. They had been practicing it, growing bolder each time because nobody stopped them. Until we did, accidentally. My wife didn't come here to lead a revolution. She came here to correct a wrong. But once correction begins, it drags every other wrong into daylight. Karen banged a gavel. Yes, an actual gavel. Like she was presiding over a courtroom she built in her imagination. Everyone calm down, she said, voice cracking. We need to stay constructive. Constructive. The word again. Meaning. Soft, polite, easy to manage. But the room wasn't interested in politeness anymore. They wanted clarity. The older woman who first asked the yes/no question wasn't finished. She stood again, eyes hard like someone whose patience had been disrespected for years. We want a vote. You could almost hear Mark smile next to me, not out of joy but recognition. HOAs survive on passivity. They collapse under participation. A vote means the story is over. A vote means the truth wins, even if the board tries to hide it. Karen stuttered, actually stuttered. We haven't prepared, we should table. People weren't listening anymore. Someone yelled, vote. Another voice, vote now. Then a third louder, stronger, vote. It didn't matter who echoed it. What mattered is that the room had turned into a majority, and the board was suddenly just 6 people with papers, not the authority they believed themselves to be. HOA power isn't real power. It's borrowed authority given by a community, and a community can take it back. Karen tried to regain control with the gavel again, voice shaking. You can't demand a vote today. The board must. Mark stood, walked to the front, without waiting to be invited, and leaned toward the microphone. His voice was soft, like someone reading instructions on a box. Your bylaws allow a vote of no confidence at any public meeting if a majority of members are present. Gasoline on dry grass. People didn't need persuading anymore. They just needed permission to take action. Hands went up, dozens, then more, like a wave. Show of hands, someone said from the front row. People raised them without hesitation. I stood still, not participating, not influencing. This wasn't my vote. This was theirs. One hand mattered more than mine. My wife's. She didn't raise it fast. She waited, watching, not judging, observing. Then slowly, she lifted her hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough for the board to see it. A federal officer had just voted against them. Not because of power, but because of principle. You could see the moment pride cracked into fear on Karen's face. Every board member's eyes followed the hands, counting, calculating, realizing. When the final count was called, nobody even pretended to argue. A majority. By a lot. The board had lost the room. And when you lose the room, you lose the whole thing. HOA boards don't fall because of lawsuits. They fall because people stop believing their authority is legitimate. The room didn't cheer. It didn't clap. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like relief. Like tension that's been living in walls finally dissolving. People weren't celebrating us. They were celebrating the end of something they had been living under for too long without realizing how heavy it was. Karen didn't resign, not formally. She just didn't fight. The gavel sat on the table like a prop that had lost its meaning. The two who entered the garage looked like shells. Empty, drained, shattered. Not humiliated. Just confronted with the reality they refused to see until a room full of neighbors showed it to them. After the vote, there was confusion, paperwork, logistics, new nominations, but none of that mattered in the moment. People approached us, not to thank us, not to praise us, but to talk. Not whispers now. Voices. Real voices. People telling stories, not hiding them. A man said, "I've been scared to argue with them for years." A woman said, "I didn't know we could say no." Another said, "Thank you for not letting this go." Alan, the retired man with the baseball cap, approached last. He took my hand and said only one sentence. "You gave us back our garages." It was a joke. And not a joke. I laughed. Then I felt something warm climb up my throat. Not pride. Something deeper. Understanding. He didn't mean the actual garages. He meant the private space every homeowner should feel safe in. The space where you shouldn't feel like someone might walk in with a phone camera and a clipboard. The vote didn't fix the past. It fixed the pattern. It put a wall where there used to be a door. As we walked home, the sun was setting behind the rooftops, orange lights spilling across the street like a quiet curtain closing on a long play. Kids rode bikes. Dogs barked. Someone laughed loudly near the park. The neighborhood looked normal again. Not because it was normal, but because the abnormal had been confronted. At our driveway, my wife paused and looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. You?" She shrugged. A small, dry smile forming. "I've seen bigger egos fall harder." We both laughed because it was true not just about the board but about power itself. Power isn't loud. Authority isn't aggressive. Respect isn't demanded. The people who ran that board believed rules were weapons. She believed law is protection. Those two worldviews collided in a garage one morning. And today a neighborhood learned which one holds. Was it dramatic? Probably more than it needed to be. But sometimes small battles show people the lines they forgot were there. And now they remember. A community rule book is not a badge. A clipboard is not authority. And a garage is not public property. As we went inside, I closed the garage door, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit. And for the first time since that morning, the garage didn't feel like the scene of a conflict. Felt like my home again. Not a battlefield. Not evidence. Not a violation waiting to be recorded. Just a messy space filled with tools, paint cans, broken Christmas decorations, and a shelf that never deserved to become a symbol of anything. My wife picked up her coffee mug, the same one she set down the day everything changed, and took a final sip. Cold coffee. She made a face. Then she looked at the shelf and muttered, "That thing better be worth it." I smiled. It was. Not because the shelf mattered, but because what it revealed did. In the end, nobody sprinted because of a badge. They sprinted because they finally met someone who wasn't afraid to say, no. No to invented authority. No to intimidation disguised as policy. No to people who mistake their title for power. Sometimes it only takes one moment for a whole community to remember something simple. We don't live in each other's houses. We don't legislate each other's private spaces. We don't walk into garages because a handbook makes us feel large. We knock. And if nobody answers, we walk away. Not because we're weak, but because we understand the line. A line the board forgot. A line my wife reminded them of, with 7 quiet words. "I'm a U.S. Marshal. Step away." The rest wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. And everybody learned it. Some learned it the hard way. Some learned it at the ballot box. Some learned it from the story itself. And maybe that's enough. Because if you want to know when a neighborhood becomes a community, it's not when everyone agrees. It's when everyone understands where they stand and what they won't allow. They won't allow trespass. They won't allow retaliation. They won't allow fear disguised as safety. And they won't allow a clipboard to enter a garage again. Not here. Not anymore. In the end, this wasn't a story about a metal shelf, a violation letter, or even a garage door left open on a Saturday morning. It was about something much bigger, something we forget until it's challenged. Home is private. Home is personal. Home is yours. Rules make neighborhoods cleaner. Policies make communities easier to manage. But none of that gives anyone the right to step across your threshold and pretend a title makes them the law. For a long time, the people on that board believed authority was something you could declare. They believed being elected meant being obeyed, and that fear was the fastest way to keep things quiet. They forgot the truth. Authority isn't a clip on a badge, and power isn't printed in a handbook. Authority is earned through respect, fairness, and boundaries. The day they walked into my garage wasn't the day they made a mistake. It was the day they revealed the mistake they'd been making for years, confusing rules with rights. And the day an entire room full of neighbors raised their hands wasn't a victory for me. It was the moment the neighborhood remembered that power only works if we let it. You don't have to wear a badge to defend your space. You don't need legal training to say no. You don't need permission to protect your own doorframe. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to shrink. And when you do, something amazing happens. People who were quiet find their voices. People who were scared find their confidence. People who felt alone realize they were part of a community the whole time. That's what changed here. Not the board, the people. Because rules don't create community. We do. If this story meant something to you, if you believe communities are stronger when respect beats intimidation, and that no one should have to defend their garage like a courtroom, do one thing. Share the story. Tell the quiet neighbor. Tell the person who thinks they're alone. Tell the family who got a letter they didn't know how to respond to. Let them know that rules aren't weapons, and that standing up doesn't require yelling. Just clarity and courage. Like the video, if you believe no HOA should ever treat personal property like public territory. Comment your own experience. Someone out there needs to hear it. Subscribe for more true stories where ordinary people remind systems where the line is drawn. And remember, they didn't run because of the badge. They ran because someone finally told them the truth. Home isn't the HOA's to enter. It's yours. Always.